The sky of Velmora stretched endlessly above with hues of violet and amber, blending softly like a living painting, while the air was thick with the scent of flowering crystal trees that hummed ever so faintly in the breeze and shimmered like glass. Under twin suns, the human team had set up base near a calm reflective lake that mirrored the strangeness and beauty of the alien planet in every ripple, as birds with feathered tails of light moved gently across the surface, and distant mountains pulsed faintly with bioluminescent veins running like lifeblood through ancient stone. The planet was unlike anything they had seen before, peaceful yet mysterious, alive yet watchful, and it held secrets, not just in its land but in the eyes of those who walked it. Among the team was Terran, a quiet but curious xenobiologist who never spoke more than needed, but his eyes missed nothing while the others focused on collecting mineral samples or scanning environmental data. Terran watched the Velmorians, who lived nearby in elegant structures that grew out of the earth as if they were grown, not built. Their movements were graceful, their language melodic, but there was something strange about their society, something untouched and hidden, something that every human felt the moment they arrived. And it wasn't just the alien customs or the glowing soil beneath their boots. From the first briefing, the Velmorian law was made clear by their elder spokesman, who stood with gentle authority, his long, silvery robes catching the light like moving water, and his voice calm but firm as he said, "There is one law above all others that you must never break. The females of Velmora are not to be approached, not to be spoken to, not to be touched. They are sacred among our kind. Their presence is not for foreign eyes or hearts. They are not yours to know, not yours to understand, and not yours to love. Any species that has tried to cross that line has vanished without warning, without trace, and without second chances." The human commander nodded and promised full respect of Velmorian law, and every team member signed a formal agreement, acknowledging the rule. Yet, despite the warnings, despite the certainty of the consequences, Terran could not stop thinking about her. He didn't know her name, he had never spoken to her, but he saw her standing near the edges of the jungle just beyond the crystalline trees, watching him silently with eyes that seemed too ancient for her young face, glowing softly with the same patterns that pulsed in the land around her. At first he believed it to be coincidence, perhaps curiosity, or even coincidence again, but she appeared every time he worked near the jungle edge, always at a distance, always still, never moving closer and never speaking. He tried not to look for her, but his eyes found her anyway, drawn to her presence, like a tide pulled by the moon. And though she said nothing, though her face remained calm, there was something in her eyes that made Terran wonder if silence was only part of the message and not the whole. Others began to notice too. One of the technicians whispered that she was always near Terran, always only him, and the medic joked nervously, saying maybe she had chosen him. Maybe that was bad news, but the laughter felt forced, and behind every smile was fear, the fear of breaking the unbreakable law, the fear of touching what was forbidden, because history had shown again and again that the Velmorians didn't give second warnings. They didn't explain what happened when the law was broken. They simply made people disappear. Terran wanted to ignore her, wanted to follow orders, wanted to remain just a scientist on a peaceful mission, but the feeling that grew inside him was hard to ignore. It wasn't desire or arrogance, it was something deeper, the sense that she was trying to show him something, not with words, not even with gestures, but just by being there, by being constant, by not looking away when their eyes met, and by staying just far enough to be seen but not approached, like a signal waiting for a response. He didn't speak to her, he didn't step toward her, he didn't wave or smile, but he watched and wondered and quietly began to take notes in a hidden part of his journal, trying to find meaning in a silent connection that defied language, culture, and even reason. And every night, as he lay under the shimmering canopy of alien stars, he asked himself the same question: why her, why him, and what would happen if one day he stepped forward and Velmora kept its silence, the jungle watching, the skies glowing, the mountains breathing, and somewhere in the distance, The Untouchable waited. The days passed slowly on Velmora as the human team continued their work, cataloging life forms, collecting data from the soil, and scanning the layered atmosphere for traces of unknown compounds, while the planet itself seemed to live and breathe in harmony with its people who moved like spirits through their environment, never disturbing the balance, never breaking the silence, and never giving more than was asked. The Velmorians remained polite and distant, showing cooperation, but never connection. Always helpful but never open, and among them the females remained unseen by most, hidden behind a curtain of unspoken tradition. But Terran saw her again and again, and something about her presence grew stronger with each silent appearance. He never told the others what he felt when she appeared, how the air felt heavier, not with fear, but with meaning, how the colors around her seemed brighter, more alive, and how the ground itself felt warmer beneath his boots when she was near. Was as if the world shifted in her presence. Though she never spoke, never gestured, never moved closer, she said more through her silence than anyone had ever said in words. She became a question that echoed louder each day, a question only he could hear, and yet could not answer. The others began to grow uneasy, their eyes flicking toward the jungle edges, more often their conversations shorter and filled with nervous glances. The mood in the camp shifted, not through events, but through atmosphere, as if the jungle itself was whispering warnings through the leaves, as if the laws written in the roots of Velmora were watching and waiting for someone to forget the rules and take one step too far. And yet she came again at sunset, standing just beyond the flowering stones that marked the boundary between wild and safe, between known and forbiddens, and her eyes met Terran's once more, and this time they did not look away. That night, as the others rested, Terran wandered toward the quiet clearing beside the lake where the glowing fish drifted like fireflies beneath the surface, and he sat alone with his thoughts, trying to fight the pull that grew inside him, not a pull of desire, but of understanding, a strange certainty that the connection he felt was not madness, not illusion, not fantasy, but something real and ancient, something Velmora itself remembered, something hidden in its soil and skies and stars, something that whispered to him alone because he had not feared her eyes and had not looked away. He returned to his tent and found something lying just inside the entrance, something that had not been there before, a small object, smooth and glowing faintly with shifting colors. It looked like crystal but felt warm to the touch, and as he held it, a wave of images surged through his mind, not clear pictures, but emotions, sensations, shadows of thoughts too large for language. He saw flashes of sorrow and strength, of separation and longing, of stars being born and falling into darkness, and through it all he felt her presence, like a steady heartbeat guiding him through a storm without sound or shape. He knew instantly who had left it and what it meant. It was not a message in the human sense, not a gift of greeting or invitation. It was something deeper, something that required no words and allowed no lies. It was a part of her, given freely and placed into his hands, not as a test, but as a truth. And though no Velmorian law had been technically broken, he knew this object was not meant to be accepted without consequence. It was an answer to a question he had not dared to ask, a signal that the boundary had already been crossed, not by movement, but by intent. The next day the elder came to him, not with anger, but with eyes heavy with knowledge and sorrow, and he said, "You have been noticed not by us, but by her. And that changes everything. You must now decide if you are human enough to walk away or foolish enough to continue. Because the law is not only ours, it belongs to the world itself, and the world does not forgive those who pretend not to see what they already know." Terran said nothing because there was nothing to say. His choice had been made long before the words were spoken, long before the warnings were given, long before the object appeared in his tent. His choice was not rebellion or defiance. It was understanding, the kind that grows slowly and silently, like roots beneath the ground, until one day it bursts forth, not as a crime, but as a truth that cannot be denied. That evening, as the sun melted behind the crystal trees and the sky turned into a sea of stars, Darren stood at the edge of the jungle and waited. And when she appeared again, she was closer than before, and though still silent, her eyes told him everything that needed to be known, and for the first time he did not stay behind the line that had been drawn by history and fear and silence. He stepped forward once more, not with pride or desire, but with quiet certainty. And though the distance between them remained, he knew the next step would not be his alone, because the untouchable had already reached toward him, not with hands, but with heart, and the story was no longer just his to walk alone. The night on Velmora wrapped the land in deep color and moving shadows, where the glowing plants pulsed softly with life and the crystal trees sang a low hum that only those who listened closely could feel, not hear. The stars above stretched wider than any sky Darren had known before, and each one seemed to shimmer more clearly, as if the very fabric of the universe held its breath for what was to come. He stood still at the border where jungle met camp, the exact place where their eyes had met again and again, the same ground where silence had spoken more loudly than any words. And in that moment, something inside him shifted, not a sudden spark, but a slow, steady unfolding, like the petals of a flower opening under moonlight. He held the object she had left him close to his chest, its glow no longer pulsing wildly, but steady and calm, as though it too had accepted something unspoken. Its warmth spread through him, not in heat, but in memory, sensations that didn't belong to him, yet felt deeply familiar, as if a distant song once forgotten had returned to his ears, carrying with it the ache of something ancient and beautiful. He closed his eyes, and the visions returned, but this time they were clearer, not sights exactly, but feelings wrapped in light and shadow. And he understood that what he was seeing was not her thoughts alone, but fragments of her world, her people, her pain, and her choice in the visions. He saw endless corridors made of light and energy long before Velmora hid its truth. He saw harmony shattered by fear, and he saw the females once moving freely through their land, not hidden, not sacred, not forbidden, but leaders and bridges of connection. Their touch carried knowledge, their presence brought understanding, their choices shaped destinies, until another race came, hungering not for war, but for what could not be stolen. The bond itself, the ability to connect without words, to share without barriers. And when they failed to control it, they destroyed what they could not possess, leaving the Velmorians to bury their past beneath laws wrapped in silence and fear. When Darren opened his eyes, he was no longer afraid. Not because he believed he was safe, but because he finally understood why she had chosen him. It was not his knowledge, not his skills, not his rank. It was because he had watched with patience, not desire, because he had listened without demanding answers, and because when faced with something sacred, he had not tried to name it or hold it, but simply let it be. Now that choice had opened a door that had been closed for centuries, and once opened, such doors did not shut easily. The team had noticed his change, though they said nothing directly. Their voices grew quiet around him, their eyes unsure and questioning. The commander asked if everything was all right, and Darren only nodded, knowing that no explanation could make sense without sounding like madness. He stopped recording his notes in public, began working alone more often, and spent more time near the boundary, where the jungle whispered and the air felt different. And each time he went, she was closer, her form no longer hidden behind branches or stone, her eyes steady and waiting, and her presence no longer distant, but near enough to feel even without touch. One evening, as the sun dipped low, turning the skies into rivers of red and gold, Darren saw her again, but this time she stepped forward, not far, just a single movement, but it broke a pattern older than memory, and as she did, the world seemed to respond. The wind stilled, the glowing plants brightened, and even the distant calls of the wild things paused, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. And without thinking, without fear, Darren stepped toward her, not in defiance, but in recognition of what already was, and what could no longer be denied. Their hands did not touch, not yet, but something invisible passed between them, something strong and vast, like an energy wave or a current in the sea. And when it did, the ground lit beneath them, soft lines of light moving outward in all directions, and the object in his hand dissolved into dust, rising like mist around them as if it had completed its purpose, and now released its final breath. The moment passed quickly, but its echo remained vibrating through the ground, and air like a silent song only they could hear later that night. Alarms in the human camp screamed. Without cause, machines failed, screens went black, sensors blinked red before freezing entirely, and even communication to the orbiting ship was lost. Nothing could explain this sudden shutdown. No one could fix the failing systems, and fear spread quickly, but Darren stood calm in the chaos because he understood what they didn't. This was not attack or punishment. This was awakening. The world had noticed what had happened. The bond once forbidden had been answered, and the old power that had slept beneath roots and stone had stirred again. Because one human had listened, and one untouchable had chosen. Camp fell into stillness as machines remained dead, screens frozen, sensors dark, and communication links silent. The humans moved through the area with tight voices and nervous hands, whispering theories about magnetic interference or natural energy surges, or perhaps an unknown atmospheric phenomenon. But none of those words could hold the weight of what Darren had felt in that single moment when he and the Velmorian female had stood near each other, and something unseen had passed between them, something too ancient for language and too real for denial. He remained quiet among them, watching their growing unease and knowing deep within that the world around them was not reacting to equipment or actions, but to intent, and to a connection that had awakened something buried far beneath the surface of Velmorave. Velmorians arrived in silence, their movements smooth and calm as always, but their eyes were no longer empty of expression, and the way they stood around the human camp felt different, less like hosts and more like watchers. The elder who had once spoken the laws with patience now looked at Darren with eyes filled with unspoken weight, as if a page from history had been turned too soon, and the words on it were not yet ready to be read. He approached without ceremony and did not wait for permission to speak. He said. The jungle responded. The lights moved. The lines opened, and the breath of the ancestors stirred. This is not an error. This is not a storm. This is a sign, and you, Darren, have crossed into a place no outsider was ever meant to enter. And now the question remains not what you have done, but what you will do with what has begun. Darren did not answer with argument or apology, for he knew the truth had already been written in the sky and soil. His voice calm and steady. He asked why the females had been hidden, why the bond had become law, and why something that felt so pure was treated as danger. The elder hesitated only for a moment before leading him through the glowing forest, deep into the trees where light filtered through leaves like falling stars, and silence wrapped around every step. And there he told the story, not with bitterness, but with sorrow. Long ago, before Velmora became still, before silence replaced sharing, the Velmorian people lived as one, their males and females walking equally through the paths of their world. The females born with the gift of connection, not magic but resonance, a deep biological and emotional harmony that allowed them to bond not just with Velmorians, but with others across species, across minds, across souls. And that gift became a threat when outside empires learned of it, not through curiosity, but through hunger. They came not with warships, but with smiles. They offered alliance, then demanded access, then sought control. And when the Velmorians refused, the outside forces unleashed destruction, meant not to conquer, but to erase. And in the ashes, the Velmorians learned that to protect their future, they must seal away what made them vulnerable. Not with weapons, but with walls of silence and isolation. The bond was hidden. The females separated from outsiders, the law written not in fear of the bond itself, but of those who would use it without understanding. And through generations, the memory of the truth faded until it remained only in fragments held by the elders and guarded by the land itself, waiting for a moment, waiting for someone who would reach, not with greed or desire, but with patience and presence. And in Darren, The ancient resonance had stirred once more, not because he sought power, but because he listened and waited, and saw her not as mystery or conquest, but as someone reaching back. The elder warned him still that danger remained not all. Velmorians believed the bond should return. Not all would accept the path he had begun already. Some among them whispered that he should be removed quietly for the safety of all. And already the balance of their world was shifting. Even the jungle, no longer silent, seemed to pulse with questions and expectations, and old voices rising from roots and stone. That night, Lyra came to him walking through the glowing forest without fear, her light patterns no longer dim, but shining fully as though the land itself gave her strength. Voice spoke at last, soft and steady, as she told him that what they had begun was more than a choice between two lives. It was the crossing of histories, the merging of past and possible future, and she said that if they ran now, they would be hunted, but if they stayed, they would be judged, and if they bonded fully, they would change everything, not just for themselves, but for both their peoples. And Terran did not ask for time or certainty because he knew the bond was already there, not waiting to be made, but waiting to be revealed. And so together, without ceremony or ritual, they stepped deeper into the sacred lands, where no outsider had walked, where even Velmorians rarely went, a place where stories still breathed and truth still slept beneath layers of moss and light. And there they would find the heart of what had been lost, and either awaken a new beginning, or disappear beneath the silence that had kept the old one hidden. Sacred lands opened before them, like a dream caught between worlds where nothing felt quite real, yet everything pulsed with life. So old it no longer needed to speak for its story to be known. The trees grew taller than towers, their roots glowing faintly beneath the soil, and the air shimmered with colors that danced across invisible threads, as if the land itself was remembering something long forgotten. Each step Terran and Lyra took was answered by a soft hum from the earth, and the deeper they went, the stronger the hum grew, until it became a song not sung but felt through bone and breath, and silence that wrapped around them like a warm current rising from ancient waters. They reached the heart of the sacred lands, a clearing surrounded by massive stones etched with symbols that pulsed with the same light as Lyra's skin, each symbol shifting slowly as though alive. And watching, the center of the clearing held a platform made of woven roots and crystal, glowing softly and waiting, not as a trap or test, but as a place of convergence. A place where past and future met, not through war or command, but through choice. Lyra stepped forward, and her light brightened as if the land welcomed her presence, and Terran followed without fear, because what lived in this place did not threaten. It remembered, and it recognized him not as an outsider, but as a missing piece finally returned. As they stood side by side, the air thickened with energy. The symbols on the stones flared brighter, and a wave of light spread outward from the platform. Not harsh, not blinding, but gentle and endless, flowing like a river without end, carrying with it memories of bonds once shared, of peace once known, of a time when connection was not danger but strength. And Terran felt the pulse of it all, not as words but as understanding. The bond had begun long before he touched her, long before she left him. The glowing shard, it had begun when she chose to be seen, and when he chose to see her without fear or demand. The bond completed itself not through force or ritual, but through presence, two beings standing together in a place that had waited so long for that single moment. And the clearing responded in silence as lights danced above them, forming shapes and echoes of lives long past, showing glimpses of other Velmorian females who had once reached across stars, and those who had been lost when others failed to understand their gift. And now, through Terran and Lyra, a new path opened, not a repetition, but a rebirth, not the past returning, but the future unfolding, with roots grown from old truth. When they emerged from the sacred lands, their presence alone silenced the camp, and the forest seemed to bow slightly as if acknowledging what had passed. Even the Velmorian elders waited, without speaking, their eyes reflecting not fear but awe, as the jungle behind Terran and Lyra glowed more brightly than ever. before its colors deeper. Its air warmer, its light steadier, and the bond between them visible not in touch or sound, but in the way they moved in unity, in the way their presence changed the rhythm of the world around them. Terran spoke for the first time to the elders, not with arrogance, but with calm, saying the bond is not a threat. It is a bridge the law was made to protect, but now it must evolve, not to repeat the past, but to grow beyond it. And his words echoed through the clearing, not as command but as reminder. And though there was resistance in some eyes and hesitation, in many hearts the jungle spoke. Louder than any argument, its light reaching into the sky like a beacon, announcing that Velmora had awakened. In time the machines in the camp powered on again, one by one, but the humans no longer relied on them as they had before, because what they had witnessed could not be measured or scanned. It had to be felt and respected, and many among the team chose to stay longer to learn, not just from data, but from connection. And slowly, cautiously, Velmorians came forward, not just the males but the females too, not in rebellion, but in recognition that hiding what was sacred had kept them safe, but it had also kept them alone. And so new agreements formed, not written in treaties, but in shared walks through glowing forests, and shared stories told by firelight, and in shared silences that spoke louder than voices. The bond between Terran and Lyra became more than legend. It became a symbol not of broken law but of restored truth. And though challenges remained, and not all minds changed overnight, the world had shifted. The wall between species cracked not by war or force, but by two souls who had seen each other across fear and chosen to reach instead of retreat. The final image of their story was not a grand speech or ceremony, but a quiet moment beneath the twin suns, as Lyra and Terran stood side by side watching the younger Velmorians and humans walk together near the edge of the jungle, where once only warnings had lived. Now laughter and light moved freely, and the bond once hidden had become the beginning of something greater, something that no longer needed to be untouchable. The end.